Hey Pennsylvania, it's wine o'clock on Wine Time PA. Join Rob, Holly, and Steve as they explore their home state of Pennsylvania and all the wonderful wineries it has to offer. Each month, they take a journey tasting the wines of PA. If you're able, pour a glass of your favorite wine and join us now for Wine Time.
Welcome, everybody, to another exciting edition of Wine Time PA. I'm one of your hosts, Steve, and I'm here with Rob.
Hello.
And my lovely wife, Holly.
Hi, everyone.
For those that are new to our podcast, the three of us are just your everyday wine aficionados, documenting our mission to visit every winery in our home state of Pennsylvania, and we strive to give you the impression of what you can expect when you visit. Today, we will be discussing our 2024 visit to Paradocx Winery, located in Landenberg. If you've never heard of the town of Landenberg, me either. It's located in the countryside, about an hour from downtown Philadelphia. Holly and I actually have been there in the past with some friends when they resided in the area, but 10 years or more is an eternity to my old brain, so let's just pretend that this is the first time we've been there.
Yeah, I knew we had been there before, and when we were pulling in, I was hoping I'd get like this, yes, I remember this place. Yeah, that didn't happen for me. But two things did trigger my memories in my brain when we were there. The first was the tasting flights. Each wine comes with a flight with this nice little laminated card that tells you about the wine in the glass that you order, and I really liked that.
Yeah, and that's about the only thing I remembered.
Yeah. The second thing I remembered, though, was the paint cans. Anybody that I know that mentions Paradocx talks about their paint cans. And basically, for those of you who don't know, they take a paint can and they turn it into a wine dispenser. So it's a can of paint with like a spout on the front that you can serve wine out of. It's pretty cool, actually.
Yeah, and how did I never remember that?
I don't know.
It's so unique.
It really is.
This was also not my first time at Paradocx, but again, it was been probably well over 10 years since I had first visited Paradocx when I was first starting to get into the wine. And again, like Steve, my old brain just wasn't remembering much about it, other than I did remember the paint cans, just because of their unique name and such a unique feature about them.
Since you're from that area, Rob, I remember specifically, though, you are the one that told us where that name comes from.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I've been there before. I actually grew up in the area, not too far away from Paradocx, so I was already familiar with them. And they do spell their name a little bit on the unique side. They put a C between the O and the X, so it's like docs, like a doctor. And that's because they're owned by the Hoffman and Harris families, and the name comes from the two couples, all of which were friends, and they were practicing physicians. So pair of docs, pair of doctors. And so that's how they got their clever naming for this winery.
Cute. Very cute.
Yeah, that's interesting.
They started out by just planting and sold grapes for several years before deciding to open their own winery in 2008.
Isn't it funny how that's how so many wineries got started? Hey, let's grow grapes. Hey, I'm tired of selling grapes to other wineries. Let's make our own wine.
Well, I think some of that just has to do with the process of getting your vines established.
Oh, yeah, and there's so much in the wine industry to learn.
So that's how they got their start in 2008. They took their grapes and they decided to make it into wines themselves. And so while they do grow a lot of their own grapes on site, they do sometimes get their grapes from other places, but every single one of their wines is made from Pennsylvania grapes.
Which is great. PA wine, represent. Awesome.
Yeah, that's becoming an important trend that I'm noticing that we're stumbling on kind of by accident. Not every winery we've been to does that, but quite a number of them are very proud of the fact that most, if not all, come from PA.
Agreed.
Yep. Great. Now let's say you want to visit. Reservations are not required, but they are strongly recommended on the weekends. We visited on a Friday, and I made a reservation for us, and I did it right on their website. And our reservation was for seating inside the building, which I'm glad we did that day, as it was hot.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Like, they had the beautiful patio outside, but I could not have been happier being inside. I don't know when you're listening to this, but this was during that crazy heat wave that was going on the whole nation. And we just we were just like being scorched.
Yeah, sorry about that. I must have had my weather machine set on high.
Yeah, our local meteorologist over here couldn't help us out.
Well, despite the heat, and don't worry, if you prefer an outdoor seating, they do actually have a really nice stone patio outside. It was a good size, and I like that they had like some sunshade sails to cover it, and they had lots of tables and seating. And I really appreciate that because just overall they had a lot of options for sitting, which I enjoyed. It's more like where there was places to sit and you didn't feel crowded with other people. But overall, my first impressions of the winery was that it was lovely. I thought it was a really great country setting on top of the hill with a nice view of the grapevines and the area around. I even loved that the grapevines lined the parking rows.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that.
Yeah.
I mean, growing up in Chester County, where this winery is located, I just loved the ride into the winery, going through the winding country roads, passing the farms and seeing the horses and goats and sheep out just milling about. And, at the winery, just everything, those grapes on the parking lot were fabulous. I like the signs that they had inside, especially they had this nice big chalkboard where they had a lot of the wines and the grapes kind of written on branches of like a tree. It was just a really nice setting, and I'm surprised I didn't remember it from last time.
Yeah, it really is a nice setting. I have to comment on the bathroom sink. I know it's a weird thing to comment on. I didn't get a picture of it because, I was going to the bathroom and I didn't take my phone. It seems kind of odd to take your phone and take a bathroom of a sink. But it was really just like this flat wooden table. And there was just like a little spout of like a hole that went along the bottom and the water stripped in there. It was just really cool and unique and something that stuck out in my brain. But yeah, overall, I think it was a beautiful setting. And if you want more information, just check our social media. We'll have some pictures of the winery itself that you can check out.
Yeah, in terms of the wine they had 25 wines on the menu, but they also had 6 extra wines the day we were there, which was actually kind of nice. Mm-hmm. Some were even on tap, which added a little different dynamic to the taste of the wines. They also had 2 wine slushies available, which for some unknown reason we didn't partake in, despite the heat. The breakdown of the wines was 8 white, 8 red, 1 sparkling, 1 rosé, and 7 sweet. But unfortunately, they were out of one of my favorites, the Concord.
So you could order those wines by the flight glass or even by the bottle. And as Steve mentioned, they also have wine slushies. For your wine flights, you can order 4 wines, and you can do a combination of either preset flights or you can do custom flights. Just note that the preset flights can save you a couple of dollars if you choose to go that route. Price ranges on bottles of wine seem to start around $16 and go up to around $30, at least as of recording of this episode. The paint cans Holly mentioned before are around $48, and it is their signature or trademark distribution mechanism for Paradocx. If you aren't a fan of wine but still want some adult beverages, while you aren't allowed to bring your own alcohol, they do offer some beer options as well as some mixed drinks and various spirits. In fact, you could even do a beer or whiskey flight, and they even had mimosa and wine slushy flights available for purchase.
Yeah, they really had a lot of interesting options. In fact, if you aren't into alcohol at all, they also offer mocktails, soda, lemonade, iced tea, bubbly and assorted flavors, ginger beer, and even have a coffee bar with cappuccinos, lattes, and Americanos. Mm-hmm. If you can't find something to drink at Paradocx, then you need more help than our podcast can support.
True. But they also offer some really great food options. Now, you're not allowed to bring in any outside food, but they actually have a really nice selection. It's not a huge menu like you might find in an everyday restaurant, but it's bigger than what you would find at most wineries and more than enough to have a complete meal. Besides the typical things like cheese and charcuterie boards, they did have things like crab dip, pretzel bites, flatbreads, soups, sandwiches, and even a section categorized as Thai corner. They had things like pot stickers, chicken curry dip, and they had these duck tacos I was really tempted to try. They also offer brunch on Sundays, which I thought was cool. What I personally tried, or the 3 of us personally tried that day, was a hummus platter, which was hummus that came with some sort of naan or pita bread, some veggies, and it was great for the hot day we visited. And then we also had some very, very delicious chicken nachos.
Oh my God, those chicken nachos were so good.
Yeah.
I mean, they come out with this. It was a decent sized platter. They had the tricolored tortilla chips that's just fun to see, I think, anyway. Then they topped that with this cheese and ranch drizzle that was really tasty. There were some tomatoes and even pineapple on this nacho platter. But the piece de resistance was the seasoned chicken. It was this Caribbean jerk seasoning, and it was so tasty. Honestly, I didn't want to share this with you guys, but I did because I like you guys. So
Well, unfortunately, it was a pretty big portion.
it was a big size too.
Yeah, so we didn't have to fight too much. But yeah, that drizzle on top, oh, that was so good. So let's move on to the best part of the podcast. And that is where we get to talk about the wines that we liked best. In this part of the podcast, each of us has narrowed down our top 3 favorite wines from the tasting. For anybody new to us, all of our recommendations that we give are based on our own personal preferences. They are also based on the wines available at the time of our visit and may be subject to change. We are not being paid or endorsed by the winery or anyone in the wine industry for our recommendations. In fact, we always pay our own flights and tastings. We also strongly believe that when it comes to wine, drink what you love. So I'll start off with my number 3, and I am going way outside my comfort zone here, and I'm going to choose the Merlot.
Wait, what?
Who are you and what have you done with my
Did we
husband?
switch bodies?
Yeah, so I just found this Merlot to be different and interesting. I often say I don't like Merlot for varieties of reasons. This Merlot is exactly why I try everything at a tasting before making any kind of judgment. The flavor profile was incredibly well balanced and smooth, and I don't really have the knowledge to articulate what it is about Merlot that I don't usually like, but this Merlot didn't have it. It was just this beautiful cherry notes in the finish, and it had these like layered tannins that just sort of let the dryness taper off really well. This wine is why I say don't be afraid to branch out. You just never know when you're going to find something that surprises you. And to people who don't like Merlot, just give this one a shot. I'd be curious to know if you like it as much as I do.
I'm the Merlot drinker here, and I did like this Merlot. It was a really good example. And I'm glad you like that, Stephen. I'm glad you're reaching out and going out of your comfort zone and picking that. So I back up Steve's pick with the Merlot.
Hey, I'll always try anything. You know, sometimes the grape just doesn't sing to you, and this time it did.
I'm still going to check you for a fever here. Okay. Anyway, my number 3 pick is the Pinot Noir.
Yeah, that was a good pick, too.
Yeah, a little outside my comfort zone, but it had notes of vanilla and tobacco and clove, both in the smell and taste that I picked up on. I had a nice body, and in my notes I put it had a nice mouthfeel to it. It was just really smooth, and I enjoyed it. And as I said before, Pinot Noir is not typically in my circle of dry reds I tend to drink, but I really enjoyed this one, and so much that I wanted to give it a shout out on my list.
Yeah, I agree. I'm starting to really like Pinot Noirs. I like that they're like this lighter body dry red. Mm-hmm. I think I rated this pretty high too. My only complaint was that tobacco. I just don't like tobacco, but it was a nice wine.
Yeah, I don't always like tobacco in my wine either, but there was something about it that worked well in this wine for me.
It was a good example of a Pinot Noir, and one that I rated pretty high as well, but didn't make my list. But for my number 3 recommendation, I think I'm also going to step out of my comfort zone just a little bit here. And I'm going to choose the spiced red. While it was a very hot day the day we were there, I think this wine would be an excellent wine to drink in the fall.
Yeah.
It had those cloves and cardamom and cinnamon flavors in there. And honestly, you know, if it wasn't for the fact that it was like 1,000,000 degrees outside, I would have asked if we could warm this glass up, because I bet you that tastes even better warmed up. So again, even at room temperature, it was still a great wine and something a little more unique. And I think, again, something a little out of my comfort zone, but it was an excellent example of a spiced red. And I think it's one that made my recommendations.
Yeah, I really like this one as well. Actually, it was going to be one of my honorable mentions, so I'm glad you brought it up. The smell, the spice, and the clove with some orange peel, like right away, made me think Christmas in a bottle. It's just what I went to right away. You got that fruit in the start and then that spice in the finish, which I really liked. And you're right, it was good chilled, but I actually bought a bottle myself because I really want to try it warmed, and I'm planning to do that this holiday season.
Oh, I did not know you bought a bottle of that. That's actually nice, because one of the things I really like this, but I kept thinking when we're drinking, I bet this would be so good when it's snowing outside and heated up and just sit in front of a fire. And it was just 100 degrees that day, and I just didn't want to try a warm wine.
Well, we'll try it this fall, and we'll see. Maybe we'll post to social media our findings on it warm. But I think we're on number 2 now, right?
Yeah, I'll kick us off with the number 2. And again, I don't know, maybe it was the hot weather that was throwing me off a bit, but I chose something, again, out of my comfort zone for my number 2 pick, and that's the Niagara.
Yeah, wow.
That is different for you.
Yeah.
I'm not usually a big fan of sweet wines. I'll have a glass here or there, don't get me wrong, but maybe it was just the heat. But this Niagara was so good. Maybe it was just helping to break that heat, but it was nice and sweet on the aromas and the taste there. I had a little bit of that, classic Niagara taste with a nice finish, bit of acidity there, and just really a good example of a Niagara wine. And, I really enjoyed it. Maybe it was the heat, but I really enjoyed that wine.
No, it wasn't the heat. I really like this too. I love a Niagara, so I'm good at detecting some of the subtle differences. And I thought about picking this as my number 3 actually, but I kind of went with the Merlot for shock and awe. But yeah, I really like this Niagara as well. It really was all the things you want in Niagara. It was a bit sweet, and that probably made it even better on a warm day. But yeah, it was good.
And so if you're liking a fan of the white grape juice, this is what it is. It's usually made from the Niagara grape.
I'm going to stick with this little trend of sweeter wines, and my number 2 pick is the Catawba, which is pink, but they didn't call it that. So like most Catawbas, this is a sweeter wine, even maybe a bit too sweet for my taste, but I just love the flavor of Catawba, so I just don't care. But this just is an overall prime example of what I think a Catawba should taste like and how I want to enjoy a Catawba wine. If you love a good Catawba like I do, definitely do yourself a favor and try a glass, especially if it is beautiful outside or in the mid-90s like it was during our visit.
It was a good Catawba, and I'm not as big a fan of them as you are, Steve, but this was a good Catawba.
Yeah. So my number 2 pick is also sweet and a pink, but it's not the Catawba, it's the pale pink. It's a sweet rosé blush wine, and it's this very soft, light pink color that I thought was really gorgeous. I got in the smell mild notes of floral and a hint of red berries. The red berries came through in the wine and the finish. It's a sweet wine, for the sweetness flavor came from the berries, and it was really refreshing to me that day, again, maybe because it was so hot, but it really hit the spot on every note for me that day. And again, it really impressed me being like a sweet blush wine, because I don't tend to go to those too often, but I really enjoyed it. And side note, this is one of the ones that's also available in the paint cans. Though I did not buy it in a can because I thought, that could be dangerous, a spout someday, just gotta go into town. So I just bought a bottle instead. I figure that's probably a little bit safer for me.
So instead of a keg stand like you used to do in college, you're going to do a paint can stand?
I don't know, yeah. There could be days where that'd be tempting.
Boy.
All right, so I think we're ready for number 1 picks, right?
I believe so.
I'll kick us off here, and it's going to be shocked. Ready? It's the Pinot Grigio.
Gasp!
I know.
How can I feign surprise?
However, I have to say this one was a tough one for me, as it was actually tied with their Gruner Veltliner they had that day. But the Gruner was one of the wines with a glass in the separate menu, and there were 2 of them. Like, one was on tap and one wasn't, so I'm not sure which one I actually got. I didn't confirm this, but it didn't seem like it was a limited run or something. Maybe it was just me. Like, it didn't seem like something in their everyday menu. So I ended up with the Pinot because I love the Pinot, and I wanted to recommend something because they have so many great wines. I wanted to recommend something that you as a listener, if you're there, they would hopefully have that you can try. But either way, I do like Pinots better than Gruners anyway, and this one was really nice. It had aromas of green apple with some floral and citrus. I got a little apple in the start of the wine, then some floral with some citrus in the finish. I even hinted a note of stone. Of course, it had the acidity that I love about a Pinot Grigio, and just had everything I like about a Pinot Grigio in this wine.
For my top pick, I'm going to go back to something that's a little bit more common for me, and I'm going to go with the Cab Franc.
Interesting.
This was a nice red with those peppery aromas and taste. I would say it had a medium amount of tannins in the finish. It certainly was a medium body, though. I thought it was a little lighter in body than most Cab Francs tend to be. But it was smooth to drink and just a nice dry red that even on that hot day was really smooth and easy to drink. And if you like dry reds, and I'm the dry red drinker here, I would recommend the Cab Franc.
My number 1 is the Vidal Blanc Dry. So they also had a Vidal Blanc Semi, which was also really good too, but the dry one just stuck out to me more. It had all these wonderful fresh fruit aromas that for me were predominantly tangerine that transitioned right into the taste. This had just a bit too much acidity to me, but it brought out all this lovely bit of grapefruit in the finish that just complemented that tangerine and Vidal flavors. I typically consider a Vidal Blanc like kind of a so-so grape for me, but this one was just an excellent representation, and I definitely recommend it. And try both the semi and the dry. They're both really good, and, either way, you're going to get something you like.
Yeah, I think I actually like the semi a little bit better, and you like the dry a
Yeah,
little
which
better.
kind of is contrary
Yeah,
to
it's
our
very
taste.
opposite to us. Yeah.
Well, I'll break the tie. I kind of like the semi more than the dry. So.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry, the dry is number one for me.
It's an upside down world today, man.
So I'd also like to give a shout out to a couple of honorable mentions that sometimes come down. And I want to add the Cab Sauv as an honorable mention. This is just a really good representation of a Cab Sauv. It's also going to represent the Niagara, but since Rob mentioned it, let you know, move on.
I'm going to give a shout out to the Chamberson. I enjoyed the Chamberson a lot. It had lots of cherry and fruit in this, but there was like a touch of like almost like earthiness to it. I don't know how to describe, but I really enjoyed it. I thought it was nice.
So I'm going to give 2 shout outs, and one is with a little bit of a caveat, and that is the oaked Merlot. Now, Steve, you like the unoaked.
Yeah, that's a good point that I probably should have made. They had 2 Merlots that day, and I was talking about the unoaked, but I actually did like both of them.
You did like the
But I like the unoaked better.
I prefer my Merlots oaked with that little bit of that oakiness in there. And so I'll give a shout out just to complete the list for the oaked Merlot. And I'm also going to, Holly, you mentioned it, give a shout out to the Gruner Veltliner. I thought that was an excellent GV, and I'll give a shout out.
Yeah, we were trying so many wines and so hot that day. I wish I would have asked a little bit more about the Gruner. It was a really good wine.
Yeah, in terms of some of the other wines, they noted that the Barn Red is a bestseller, and the Concord, which, again, we sadly couldn't try, was a crowd favorite. Now, I don't have a conversion chart between what a best-selling and a crowd favorite is, so just try them both when you visit.
Yeah, and while we were there, I wandered over to a display, and I noticed they had 3 wines with medals around them. So I wanted to mention those. They were the Cab Franc,
Ooh.
Rob's favorite, the Pale Pink, which I loved, and the Pinot Gris, which to note is not the Pinot Grigio I loved, but a Pinot Gris. They're 2 different wines. I actually didn't know much about the difference between the 2, so I looked into it more after our visit. So here's our little education for today. Though the same grape, there is a difference. Comes down to a few things. One is the origin. Gris, can you guess where it comes from?
France.
Correct. Mostly the Alsace region, which
Oh, yeah, I love that region.
we all kind of like the Alsace region. And Grigio comes from...
That's all Italy.
Yeah, that's Italy. Yep, specifically the Lombardy region. So the region is one of the differences between the 2 grapes. There can also be some difference in the production method. Some winemakers use wooden barrels to ferment Gris, whereas Grigio is not. And Grigio also tends to be harvested earlier as well. Pinot Gris, because it's harvested later, tends to be sweeter and less acidic than Grigio. So those of you who don't like the acidity in Grigio, you might like Pinot Gris. In terms of taste, Pinot Grigio tends to be more light-bodied, more crisp and acidic, with fruit notes like lemon, apple, pear, and honeysuckle. And Pinot Gris tends to be more medium-bodied with lower acidity and flavors like honey, cinnamon, clove, and ginger. After learning this, I went back to my tasting notes. I did mention about the apple and the acidity in the Grigio, which is one of the reasons I loved it so much. But for the Gris, my first note was spice, that it was spicier than Grigio. I still got some of the apple and pear, but it was like a spice version with the cinnamon and the clove that I got there. So to me, Paradocx has a great example of the 2 different wines and the varietals. So if you want to kind of compare Grigio to Gris, I would recommend one at Paradocx.
That's some interesting information there, Holly. Thanks.
Yeah, it's always interesting to see like some of these wines that have very similar names, and you wonder why they're different. And
Yeah.
usually, like you said, it's not a lot of difference, but it's important.
Yeah.
So I also want to give a shout out to the staff that helped us. We were there quite a long time, having 7 flights of wine and multiple plates of food.
The chicken tacos.
Yeah, and it was just so sweltering hot, so they really worked for it that day. And just want to give another shout out to everybody who has liked and subscribed to our podcast. This really helps us grow. If you enjoy hearing us chatter about wine, please share it with a friend, especially if they are planning to go to a winery that we've already discussed. Until next time, thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to Wine Time PA with your host Rob, Holly, and Steve. We hope you enjoyed our take on Pennsylvania wineries and all that they have to offer. Please be sure to like and subscribe to this podcast. Also, be sure to follow them on social media for updates and news. Remember, when it comes to wine, drink what you love.